Hello everybody, it's Sarah, and today is not a Thursday. So not my usual uploading day, not that I've kept much of a schedule over the past few weeks, but we'll ignore that. We'll just move on from that. However, the day that is today is the 1st of December, and thus the start of Bookmas. However, I'm also not gonna do Bookmas this year. I did that last year, made that experience. I enjoyed-ish it, but I'm not ready to put myself through that stress again this year. So yeah, today is the 1st of December, it's the start of Bookmas, but I'm not doing Bookmas. Where am I going with this? I am going towards the direction of telling you that while I won't do a full Bookmas this year, I will try to upload every second day in December. The reason for that mainly being that I still have a fuck ton of reviews left from books and series that I read this year that I don't particularly want to drag into the next year with me. And then there's also a few other end of the year videos that I still want to do, have to do, and so on. That's basically where I was going with this whole setup of my intro. But anyway, today, the first video of December, the first video of any month for me, obviously, is always my wrap-ups for the month before that. So let's talk about the books that I read in November. Also, I have like a chai latte here and I'm enjoying it so much. It's not even a proper chai latte. It's like a chai syrup that you put in milk, but it tastes so good and I've been living off of this since I found it at my supermarket. So that's fun. So first, obviously, as always, I have already done a mid-month wrap-up, so let me share with you the books that I talked about in that wrap-up so that you can go and check it out if you want to, if you're interested in my in-depth thoughts on any of these books, and the mid-month check-in will, of course, be left linked down below. The books I talked about in that check-in were When a Tiger Came Down the Mountain by Nevo, which is the second novella in the Singing Hills series. Thorn of the Night Blossoms by J.C. Kang. The series is called The Tales of the Floating World and it's the first book in that series. I talked about Sebastian, which was a reread and it's the first book in the Ephemera series by Anne Bishop. Then I talked about Paradise Lost and The Women of Troy by Pat Barker, which is the sequel to The Silence of the Girls. So yeah, those are the books I talked about in my mid-month check-in, and let's now continue on with the books I read in the second half of November. As always, let's start with rereads. First, I have Kushiel's Chosen by Jacqueline Carey. This is the second book in the Kushiel's Dark trilogy, and this is, as I have said, a reread. I enjoyed my reread of the second book more than I enjoyed my reread of the first book, actually, because the first book started dragging for me a little bit because there were too many plot lines towards the end that all felt like they had already been resolved, except then they hadn't been resolved and it was like a whole deal. However, the second book is shorter, like about 200 pages actually shorter than the first book, and I enjoyed that way more. I like the pacing of the story more, I like the character development of the story more. The series follows Phaedra, who is a courtesan spy. She has been educated both as a courtesan as well as a spy, and because of the second part she is then dragged into the politics of her country. And so yeah, I just really enjoyed the development of Phaedra's character we had in this book. I also really enjoyed the relationship of Phaedra and Jocelyn in this book and how the relationship develops in this book. Like, Phaedra and Jocelyn have one of my favorite relationships in any fantasy series, really. I think it's really well done. But yeah, let me not talk too much more about this because I will do a full series review once I have reread the third book as well. Then I somehow managed to get through this bad boy, which is Offbringer by Brandon Sanderson, the third book in the Stormlight Archive series. Offbringer is probably my least favorite, or one of my least favorite Cosmere novels by Brandon Sanderson ever, and if you have been on my channel at all this year, watched any of my wrap-ups, you will know that my Cosmere reread this year has not been going too well and that I've had a lot of things to complain about. and Oathbringer being my least favorite books, of course there were even more of those. And I think Oathbringer has two of my absolutely least favorite scenes that I can point out specifically as scenes within the entirety of the Cosmere, if not within all of fantasy. Well, like scenes that I can specifically remember. It also has one of the worst death scenes in my opinion. That's just not set up, not well done whatsoever. I did not have a good time on this reread is what I'm basically saying. Also, I noticed, so tragic. I noticed, remember how, I think I actually did it this year and not last year. Remember how this year I did a video of my favorite characters of all time and Kaladin was at the very top? Well, he wasn't at the very top because Satan from the Black Jewels is still my favorite character of all time, but he was second place basically. Well, that place has now officially been taken by Adolin, and not even because I love Adolin that much more on further rereads or I love Kaladin less on further rereads, but Kaladin is just so entangled in all the issues I have with the Stormblood Archive series on this reread that it's just really hard for me to genuinely still enjoy his character, even though I really love him still. But whenever I think about him, I also think about all the other stuff, and that really annoys me. And so yeah, it's sad, but Adolin is still my baby at least. Adolin, I think, is like one of the only characters within the Stormblood Archive series that still holds up for me fully, so that's fun. Then a reread that went the complete opposite direction of Oathbringer was The Mask of Mirrors by M.A. Carrick. Like, I cannot believe that officially on Goodreads I gave both of the books 5 stars, which, by the way, I'm so struggling whether I should just remove my ratings from the Stormblood Archive series or not, because they're no longer 5 stars for me. I'm sorry, and I'm like, but they genuinely were for me when I first read them, and it's really hard, okay? But anyway, moving on to this. I first read this at the beginning of this year because this is a release from this year, and I decided to reread it because we'll get the second book in December. Although I've been told by Amazon that my copy will only arrive by the end of December, and I do not know how to deal with that. But anyway, in this series we follow Ren, who is a con artist. She grew up in the streets and as a street urchin type character, and she's returning to her home city where she grew up, and she's trying to pull off her biggest con yet, which is to make this one noble family accept her into their ranks, although not via marriage. And that's the story of our main character, and on the side we have some crime bosses. We have a ruthless, well, not ruthless, we have ruthless crime bosses. We have a very much not ruthless but very charming vigilante. We have politics, we have magic, we have different ethnical communities. It's just, there's so much to this series. I absolutely love it. And I already gave this 5 stars on my first read. I already really loved it on my first read, which, by the way, I did a full review of this, so I will leave the link down below and up there. But somehow I reread this, and on a reread I just finally could concentrate on all the little details within this story, and they are just so beautifully done, and it's like the entire book got even better. I love the setup towards the twist, because from the very beginning there's this mystery who the mysterious vigilante is. Mysterious, whatever. This vigilante, the identity behind the vigilante, it's a mystery from the very beginning, and obviously now knowing who it is from my first read, I could pick up on all the little clues that were left who it really is. And it's like so well set up to me. And then there's those little elements in terms of cultural world building, and in terms of, you know, clothing and customs and the magic systems and how the different people from the different cultures interact. And it just adds so much to the world building and so much to the story. And I could literally sit here right now and do a whole new review of this book with all the things that I discovered on the second reread. But it's just, I mean, you can tell how big of a smile I have on my face. I just love this so much, and I am someone, if I have read only one book in a series, I don't put that series on my favorites of all time list. However, with this book, if I were to make that type of list now, I would be so tempted to already put this book on that list because there's just so much to it, and I love it so much. It's so good. It is just legitimately so good. So the next book I have was actually one that I already read in November, not in November, in the first half of November, but I forgot to talk about it, and that is A Hero Born by Jin Young, which is the first book in the Legends of the Condor Heroes. This is a new translation of a classic Chinese martial arts fantasy, kind of. I don't know if I would even classify it as fantasy because I'm not familiar enough with genre conventions within Chinese literature. However, it has been translated, you know, into Western genre conventions as a fantasy. However, I'm not sure if I wouldn't even actually more say it's a historical fiction with some fantasy elements, but those fantasy elements are very much rooted within, you know, Chinese legends, history, concepts. But then again, isn't that just what fantasy for us is as well? You know, just historical fiction, just based on very Western legends, myths, and so on, magical concepts and so on. So, well, long story short, I don't know which genre to put this as, and I don't feel like I'm qualified to decide which genre this is. But I won't talk about this too much because I did read this for my international fantasy video. So basically it's just a story about a boy who has to learn martial arts for reasons. It's written in a very episodic way, which surprised me. Like, the ending didn't feel like a definitive ending. It didn't even feel like the end of like one of the episodes within the story. So I don't know, I might look into how this was originally published in Chinese because, well, not in Chinese, in China, because yeah, it just confuses me. And so overall I would say I did enjoy this. There were a lot of elements that I found very interesting and where I'm just like, oh, I love how this is different from Western fantasy. In terms of the translation, I can't say how well or how not well done it is, but yeah. Anyway, read this, enjoyed it, definitely want to continue on in the series. So we got 4 books left. Next, let me just very quickly mention, I finished the 2nd volume of my Arabian Nights or 1001 Nights. I have mentioned the same thing every time I mentioned it. And that is that I think with a lot of fairy tale collections, you're just better served going for the best of collections rather than the full collections because, yeah, a lot of the stories are very boring or repetitive, and so it's just whatever. Then I have a non-fiction, and that is The Brutish Museums, The Benin Bronzes, Colonial Violence and Cultural Restitution by Dan Hicks. He is one of the curators at the Pitt Rivers Museum, which is one of the biggest ethnological museums in Great Britain. And he wrote this book basically, first of all, talking about the history behind the Benin Bronzes. For those of you who don't know, basically Great Britain in 1897 looted and pillaged Benin City and the royal palace there, and they took thousands of cultural artifacts with them. And with that, basically also the history of the people living there. And so now these Benin bronzes are all over the world. A lot of them are in museums. I believe we assume that even more of them are in private collections that we don't even know, that we can't even, you know where they are anymore. And so this book, first of all, deals with the history behind how these bronzes, how these artifacts came to museums, and then also calls for restitution of not just these objects, but also other objects. It's just the Benin bronzes are one of the most prominent examples of, well, looted objects, but also colonial violence. Like objects with a history of colonial violence. That's what I wanted to say. And so it's just the example where he thinks things through. I honestly really enjoyed this. There's a lot of paragraphs that just hit really hard and, you know, are very poignant and very, well, almost blunt. Like the way he says things, the language is very beautiful, but are very blunt in their contents of what he says. I mean, there are some elements where I'm, you know, it's like, not exactly a fan of. Like, first of all, he's just sometimes a little bit too self-congratulatory that he's a museum curator in Great Britain, and he talks about this. Then something else that I don't like is that in this book he talks a little bit as if museums aren't already discussing restitutions and possibilities of restitutions a lot, and like there aren't already things being done to make sure that objects get back to the people of origin. But part of the reason is because I think the context and the way these things are talked about in Great Britain are a lot different from mainland Europe and continental Europe. And I think a lot of those discussions are a lot more present in mainland Europe than in Great Britain, and he mostly talks in a English context, in a UK context. However, the way he talks doesn't make that clear that he's mostly, like, not always makes it perfectly clear. So it's just, there's some things that I would criticize. Also, he does say he's not against ethnological museums and ethnographical museums, and that he very much loves ethnographical museums and the potential that they hold. But I would have loved it if he had gone a little bit more into that potential as well. So yeah, it does what it's supposed to do, but it's mostly just, you know, an accusation of wrongdoing, which I'm not gonna deny that there isn't. Like, it's something that very, very much interests me, concerns me, that I am very much looking into currently, because also, as I've mentioned multiple times already, I do want to work in a museum in the future, hopefully. And so because of that, I'm also taking a lot of courses at uni. I'm visiting a lot of lectures. We talk a lot about restitution as well with people, or I have talked to people working in the Weltmuseum, which is the ethnological museum in Vienna, currently. And it's just, you know, I think, like, especially with the bean and bronzes, I think it might be a bit more of an easier issue, like just give them back. But a lot of times it's not as easy as just give them back, because there's a lot of actors within this discussion. There's the state, there's the cultures of origin, there's the museums, there's the states where the museums are located. So yeah, I just think that this book, I mean, I don't think it was the intention of this book to go through that debate of what we need to do and what we can do, but I think it was more along the lines of, it's time that we stop pretending like this isn't something that we have to do. But then again, like, as far as the experiences that I have made so far, it's not necessarily something where a lot of museums are pretending like it's not a big deal. Anyway, I think in terms of, if you're interested in the history of the bean and bronzes, this is definitely a book to pick up. I think also if you're interested in very harsh criticism of museums and knowing where the criticisms of a lot of museums lie, I think this is also a book to pick up. If you want a nuanced discussion of the possibilities as well as the limits of restitution and the different viewpoints that are present within the debate around restitution, then this book might not exactly be it. So 2 books left to talk about, both of them YA. First, I finished the Gilded Wolf series by Rojani Chokshi with The Bronzed Beasts. This series is a series set at the end of the 19th century. The first book is set in Paris, and it's an ensemble heist story. It's a YA ensemble heist story, and basically we follow this group of people who try to help their leader get his house legacy, his family legacy back. And there's a lot of colonial, well, for a YA there's a lot of colonial discussions aspects in there. All of the characters are part of minorities and part of diverse groups. And so yeah, that was the first book. This is the third book. Not gonna lie, was a little bit disappointed. Like, most of this just felt like a little bit blah. I don't know how else to describe it. The end, to be fair, did get me to tear up a little bit, but it was the type of ending where I'm like, yeah, obviously I'm gonna tear up. But overall, I have to say this ending didn't hit it out of the park for me. I literally have nothing to say about this. It's like, it's not even that it was necessarily bad, it's just that it was ungood. Does that make sense? So yeah, I have nothing to say about this. Literally nothing. And then another sequel to a YA series that disappointed was Cytonic by Brandon Sanderson, which is the third book in the Skyward series. In the Skyward series, we follow Spencer, who lives on a planet that is constantly attacked by aliens. Because of that, fighter pilots are kind of very revered. And Spencer's father used to be a fighter pilot, and so she wants to be one too. However, because Spencer's father was branded a coward after defecting during a crucial battle, they don't want to let her into the flight academy, but Spencer won't let that stop her from flying. So this is the third book, so I can't say too much, but basically my basic feelings are, the positive thing is Brandon Sanderson did manage to have a good final, you know, climax scene. Once again, Brandon Sanderson is very good with the endings of his books, but overall my feelings are this felt rushed and a rehashing of the plot of the first two books, just less interesting with less interesting characters. And I sadly can't go into any more depth because that would be spoilers for the first two books. But yeah, it was really disappointing. I mean, it's not like I didn't enjoy it. Like, I'd probably give it a solid 3 stars. However, I absolutely loved the first book. I also really loved the second book. I was a little bit disappointed in terms of my expectations with the second book because the story went in a different direction. However, on reread, I could then, you know, see that legitimately I really did enjoy the story. I read the first 2 of the novellas that came out in October and November, which were Sunreach and Redawn. I really enjoyed those. I mean, I could already see from the novellas that something that I was hope might happen in this book won't happen. So that also didn't happen. But I really did enjoy the 2 novellas. But this book just felt rushed. It felt rushed. I feel like at this point, Brandon Sanderson, I just want to tell him to please maybe take 5 years off and maybe try to not write 50 series at the same time and to not be able to fully give your attention to any of the series because he probably has to plot the other series on the side, especially in the Cosmere, and it's just... I was disappointed. I was just really disappointed, and so I'm just gonna stop talking now. But yeah, that was it for this video. That was it for the books that I read in November. If you have any thoughts on any of the books, leave them in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and also maybe subscribing. All the links to my social media, as well as all the links to my book club of Queens, Witches and Valkyries, where I read one adult high fantasy book written by a woman or genderqueer person per month, will be linked down below. In December, we're reading Dark Apprentice by Val Neal, so if you're interested in joining, join us over on Discord. And with all of that said, I hope I'll see you very soon. Bye!